The knock came from inside the house. Not the front door. Not the back. From behind the walls. I froze in the hallway, one hand still gripping the mug of half-warm tea, steam rising like a weak breath. The sound wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was careful. 3 slow taps. Pause. 2 more. Tap. Tap. Wait. Tap. Tap. The house was old, but not that old. No hollow walls. No secret spaces. At least, that's what I had believed since buying it 6 months earlier. A modest snow-covered colonial at the edge of a quiet town where Christmas lights blinked politely and neighbors waved without ever stopping to talk. Another knock. Closer now. I pressed my ear against the wallpaper. The sound came again, right beside my head. This time, it wasn't knocking. It was scratching. Slow, patient nails dragging across wood. My breath fogged the wall. "Hello," I whispered, hating myself for asking. Silence. Then a voice, not loud, not angry, pressed through the plaster like a memory trying to return. "Please, open it." The tea slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor. Behind the wall, something shifted. Something heavy. And then I realized, with a certainty that made my knees give out, the voice wasn't asking me to open a door. It was asking me to open Christmas morning. I moved into the house in late summer. August, maybe. The kind of month where heat clings to the walls and everything smells faintly of dust and old wood. The realtor had called it cozy. I should have known better. Cozy houses always hide things. Drafts, creaks, memories that don't belong to you. The first night, the floorboards groaned under my steps. Pipes rattled like distant whispers. I told myself it was normal. Old houses breathe. Settling, contracting, expanding. They make sounds you notice only if you are listening too hard. By December, the snow piled up outside, blanketing the roof and folding the world into quiet. Christmas lights blinked politely along the neighboring houses. The town seemed peaceful, but the house never stopped. Night after night, soft, sharp, almost imperceptible sounds came from the walls. Sometimes it was tapping, sometimes scratching. Once I thought I heard a faint voice whispering, but I laughed at myself. Houses don't speak. People do. The day before Christmas, I cleaned the kitchen and set out mugs for tea, trying to imagine the house's home. The knocking started again. Soft. Careful. 3 taps. Pause. 2 taps. Repeated over and over. My heart hammering, I pressed my ear to the wallpaper. "Hello," I called, voice small. Silence. Then, faint, like a shadow brushing against memory, a voice came through the plaster. "Please, open it." I stumbled back. My tea sloshed and soaked the tiles. My eyes fixed on the wall. There was no door. No seam. Just flat, floral wallpaper, faded and peeling. I told myself it was a trick. My imagination. A leftover echo of the day. But then the wall vibrated slightly under my fingers, almost like breathing. Later, I measured the hallway. 12 steps from the kitchen to the bedroom. By nightfall, I walked it again. 15. The wall seemed to shift subtly, growing or shrinking when I wasn't looking. Objects moved just enough to notice. A chair angled differently, a picture frame tilted toward the corner. Small, almost polite hints that I wasn't alone. On Christmas Eve, Mrs. Hargreave, my neighbor, stopped by. White hair, eyes too sharp for her age. She held a tin of cookies I couldn't touch. She lingered in the hallway, staring at the wallpapered wall longer than comfort allowed. "You hear it too?" she asked softly. I shook my head. "Don't open it on Christmas," she whispered. And she left before I could ask why. The night fell heavy. The house seemed to tighten around me. Every creak, every sigh of wood, every gust of wind against the windows sounded like it was waiting. I lay awake, counting the seconds between each soft, deliberate tap in the hallway. When the knocking returned, it wasn't polite anymore. It was urgent, demanding. I could feel it under my skin. My breath quickened. I pressed my ear against the wallpaper, and the voice was there again, closer this time, more intimate, almost like it knew my name. "You know it's time." I couldn't move. The house waited. So did the voice. A decision pressed against me. Open it or ignore it forever. I realized then that whatever lay behind that wall wasn't just hidden. It had been waiting for me, and I had no idea what I would find. Sleep became a stranger. Every night I lay awake, listening to the walls, counting breaths, wondering if the tapping was real, or if it had always been inside me. I stopped leaving the house at night. Snowfall outside became a mirror for my own isolation. I told myself I was careful, rational, sane. Rational people ignore old houses that whisper, but the house didn't care about rationality. At first, it was subtle. A door left slightly ajar that I swore I had closed. A chair angled toward the wall, an envelope that appeared on the counter, empty, but wet with condensation. A faint smell of smoke, not from my fireplace, not from anywhere, curling up from nowhere in particular. I started noticing patterns. The knocking returned, always the same. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps. At first, I pressed back, rapping my knuckles against the wall. The house went silent, but then came whispers. Tiny, almost polite, brushing against my eardrums like silk. Please. One voice whispered. I jumped back. What do you want? I demanded. Silence. Then a shiver crawling down the hallway. And a new sound. Scratching. Slow, methodical, deliberate, almost like fingernails across dry wood. I could no longer sleep. I measured the rooms obsessively. The hallway always stretched at night. My bedroom, smaller in the morning, grew by nightfall. The guest room, the one that would later hold the hidden door, always seemed to step out of alignment with the rest of the house. I began researching the house. Town records were sparse, fragmented. There had been a fire in the late 1970s, a minor renovation afterward. Names of previous owners. The Carrington family. A mother, father, 2 children. Nothing unusual. No deaths. No disappearances. Just gone. Yet the library whispered another truth. The librarian was old, bent, her hands trembling as she shelved books. I hear you're living at the old Carrington place, she said softly, avoiding my eyes. Yes. Is something? Don't bother. People leave things behind that are better left. I pressed, and her voice dropped further. Rooms didn't line up. They shifted. Children hid in them. Sometimes the house took them. I laughed at her lightly, nervous. But the laughter felt hollow. By the 3rd day of snow, my apartment, my sanctuary, was anything but. My reflection in mirrors seemed delayed, sometimes too long to blink naturally. Shadows moved against me. Sometimes I caught glimpses of figures standing just outside the hallway corners, dissolving when I turned my head. The knocking became pounding. Not polite anymore. Urgent. Impossible to ignore. I started to hear voices behind the walls. Whispering. Some faintly human, some jagged, broken. They're waiting, one said. Do you remember? Another asked. I shook my head. I didn't. Or maybe I had and I was trying too hard to forget. Memories came in pieces. Flashes of a fire, children crying, laughter, snow outside. Faces I didn't recognize, yet somehow knew. The more I remembered, the less I wanted to. Objects began moving too deliberately. A clock would stop at exactly 11:11 p.m. every night. A framed photograph of the street outside my window tilted toward the hallway. A chair I left in the kitchen would face the wall when I returned from the bathroom. I tried to leave. I packed a bag. I opened the door. Snow had drifted against it like sand dunes. I didn't even notice until I tried to step out. Footprints led back inside, but none outside. I started talking to the walls. Who's there? What do you want? A whisper slid back through the plaster, close enough to feel warm against my cheek. We kept it safe, just like you asked. Safe? What are you talking about? Your room. The words made my stomach twist. My room. I had lived here for months. I had no children. My memory felt fractured. I remembered hiding. Somewhere. A fire. Somewhere. A cold hand holding mine, leading me into a dark space. I realized then, I had been here before. Or had someone else been? And the house had been waiting for me to return. By Christmas Eve, I was barely human. Paranoia became routine. I refused to sleep. I followed the hallway walls with my hands like a blindfolded child. Every room became suspect. The wallpaper seemed to pulse with life. Small noises, pipes, creaks, subtle groans, became meaningful, a pattern, a message, a warning. On the evening of the 24th, I saw them. Faces, pressed against the walls. Not quite human, not quite shadows. Watching. They didn't move when I moved. They didn't breathe. But I could feel their attention. And then the knocking started again, louder than ever. 3 taps. Pause. 2 taps. The same pattern, as if counting down. I tried to leave again, but the front door was locked from the inside. The keys I had left on the counter were gone. Windows refused to open. Snow pressed against the glass, sealing me in. I searched for a logical explanation. A hidden room. Old houses sometimes had crawl spaces, tiny closets, forgotten pantries. But I knew the house better than anyone. There had never been a door. There couldn't be a door. Yet the scratches came again. Close. Right behind the wallpaper. I pressed my palm against it. It moved beneath my fingers, subtle, almost breathing. "I don't understand," I whispered. A voice answered. "You do. You always did. You just forgot." I couldn't remember, and yet I knew it was true. Memories pressed in fragments against my skull. Cold floors. Snow outside. Children crying. My own laughter. A fire. Hiding. Waiting. Promises made long ago that I didn't know I had kept. The night grew worse. The house began to close in. Hallways seemed longer. Ceilings lower. Shadows thicker. Every creak, every sigh of wood, every scraping sound was magnified. I stopped eating. I stopped looking outside. I stopped sleeping. I began to see flashes of the room behind the walls. Tiny glimpses when I closed my eyes. A door, wooden, painted to match the hallway. A tree half melted into the floor. Stockings blackened by smoke. Faces pressed against the walls, pale, silent, staring. I tried talking to the voices directly. "What do you want from me?" "You know," they said. "I don't." "You do. You just have to open it." I didn't want to. I couldn't. But every tap, every whisper, every cold brush against my skin reminded me. The house wasn't just a building. It was alive. And it remembered me. By Christmas morning, I had no choice. The knocking turned into pounding. The voices became urgent, insistent, angry now. They were no longer polite, no longer patient. They demanded release. And somewhere deep in my fractured memory, I knew they were right. I had promised. Long ago I had promised. I picked up a hammer, the one I didn't remember buying, and pressed my palm against the wall. The wallpaper seemed to breathe. Beneath it, faint cracks. Shadows shifted. The house inhaled. And the hidden door was waiting. The hammer felt heavy in my hands, as if it had been waiting for me all along. My palms were slick with sweat, and my breath came in short, ragged bursts. Every instinct screamed to stop, to turn away, to leave the wall as it was. But something deeper, a memory, a promise, a command I didn't fully understand, pushed me forward. I pressed my weight against the hallway wall. The plaster gave easily, crumbling beneath my fingers. Dust and bits of paper fluttered to the floor. I paused, heart pounding, listening. Silence. Too much silence. Then, a faint scraping. Slow, deliberate, fingernails across wood. I knew immediately. It wasn't coming from inside the wall. It was the wall. My fingers dug deeper, prying the last brittle shards away. Beneath it, a door revealed itself. Wooden, narrow, painted the same faded cream as the hallway. No handle. Just deep, overlapping scratches, frantic and desperate, as if something had been clawing at it for years. I froze. The house seemed to inhale around me, expanding and contracting like a lung. Light flickered, bending in impossible ways. Hallways stretched and shortened. The floorboards groaned beneath me. Every familiar space twisted alien. The walls pulsed softly, almost like skin. A voice emerged from the shadows behind the door. Not polite this time. Not patient. Urgent, insistent. "Open it," it whispered. "It's time." I shook my head, backing away. "No," I said. My voice trembled. "I can't. I don't understand." "You do," it hissed. "You always did. You just forgot." I remembered flashes. Memories I had buried deep in my mind. Snow. Cold floors. A fire. Hiding. Children crying. Laughter I didn't recognize as my own. A promise long forgotten, made in a place I could no longer locate. I pressed my hands against my temples, trying to stop the visions, but they surged stronger. The door shifted slightly, as if sensing my hesitation. Shadows poured out, crawling along the floor. Faces pressed against the doorframe, pale, silent, staring. Eyes hollow and accusing. They moved closer. Not walking. Sliding, floating, bending unnaturally toward me. I'm sorry," I whispered. "Sorry isn't enough," they said in unison. Voices overlapping, echoing, fragmenting. "You promised." I raised the hammer again, trembling. My hands shook violently. The door shifted one more time, creaking on invisible hinges. Behind it, I glimpsed the room, frozen in a nightmare of Christmas past. A tree half melted into the floor. Stockings charred black. Presents rotting under snow that had somehow found its way inside. And bodies. Faces pressed into walls, hands reaching through plaster, mouths open in silent screams. My stomach lurched. I wanted to run, but my feet were nailed to the floor. The shadows closed in. The air thickened, choking me. Every breath was a struggle. Time warped. Seconds stretched into minutes. The hallway lengthened impossibly. Doors and walls bending in ways that defied logic. "Open it," they hissed again. "Now." I dropped to my knees. My mind fractured. I could feel their anger, their longing, their weight pressing down. Memories I had buried, forgotten promises, the fire, the hiding, all collided. My sanity teetered on the edge. With trembling hands I pushed. The door resisted at first, then gave. Slowly. Painfully. It swung open, revealing the hidden room in full. And it was worse than I could have imagined. The air inside was cold, impossibly cold, carrying the scent of smoke and decay. Shadows writhed along the walls. Figures stood, or hung, in impossible positions, half visible, half fading into the darkness. Children, adults, faces I recognized and didn't recognize, pressed into the walls, mouths moving silently. All of them staring, waiting, judging. "Welcome back," a voice said close to my ear. I spun around. No one. Just shadows pooling along the floor, curling toward me. The room seemed alive. The walls pulsed like skin. The ceiling breathed. Every object, chairs, tree, stockings, shifted subtly, rearranging themselves when I wasn't looking. The past and present collided. I could hear laughter, crying, whispers overlapping, impossible to separate. I didn't know," I whispered. "You did," they said. "You always knew." A chair tipped over on its own. The tree shuddered violently, ornaments clattering to the floor. The shadows surged, pressing closer. I stumbled backward, barely keeping balance. The door slammed shut behind me. Darkness swallowed the hallway. I was trapped. Panic clawed at me. I shouted, begged, screamed. "Stop! Please!" A voice, sharp and brittle, cut through the chaos. "You cannot leave. Not now. You promised." I sank to the floor, hammer dropped beside me. My chest heaving. My mind fracturing. The room pulsed, walls breathing, shadows whispering, the air thick with the weight of countless unseen eyes. Time became meaningless. Seconds stretched into eternity. I remembered the fire again. The hiding. The snow. The faces pressed against the walls, mine among them. A scream caught in my throat. I clawed at the door, tried to push it open, but it wouldn't budge. The room was closing in. Shadows flowed like water, seeping under doors, through walls, into every corner. A voice whispered softly, almost lovingly, "You're home." And then I understood. This wasn't punishment. Not entirely. This was return. A fulfillment of a promise I didn't remember making. A memory I had tried to bury. I was part of it. The house, the hidden room, the shadows. They were all me, or I was all of them. Bound together, inseparable, eternal. I screamed, and the sound was swallowed instantly. I reached for the hammer again, but it dissolved in my hands. Dust, ash, my own reflection in the dark. Fractured, multiplied, pressed into the walls. And the house waited. Always waiting. Time lost meaning. The walls pulsed. Shadows reached out, pulling me toward the center of the room. I tried to resist, but I couldn't. The whispers became chanting. Voices overlapping. Counting, calling, demanding. "You promised," they said. And then, finally, the last fragment of light faded. The hallway outside lay empty. Silent. The front door still locked. Snow drifting against the windows, untouched. The house settled back into stillness, as if nothing had happened. But the hidden room was there, waiting, alive, breathing, patient. Inside, I was gone. The house slept after Christmas. Outside, snow fell softly, blanketing the world in white silence. Inside, the hallway stretched and breathed, as if exhaling the last remnants of a storm it had hosted for centuries. The hidden room had vanished, or perhaps it had always been there, waiting, patient, eternal. The walls no longer whispered, and the tapping had ceased. But the house had changed. And so had I, or what remained of me. Neighbors noticed it first. The silence. The absence of lights on Christmas morning. No footsteps. No movement in the snow-covered driveway. Only the faint glimmer of Christmas lights, frozen in mid-blink, reflecting in icy windows. Mrs. Hargreave was the one who noticed the change most clearly. She had left cookies on the counter every year for decades. But this time she stopped. She told others she felt eyes watching her from inside the house, though it had been empty. Children avoided the street, murmuring stories of noises, shadows, and strange figures glimpsed in the windows at odd angles. Inside, the house was eerily normal. Furniture was where it had been. Dust settled evenly over floors. A thin layer of frost lined the windows, painting intricate patterns that looked like clawed fingers pressed against glass. Yet something lingered. Not in sight, not in sound, but in memory. Anyone who entered felt it. A subtle pressure in the chest, a tightening in the throat, the uncanny sensation of being observed by a presence older than the building itself. Mail piled up. The dishes in the sink were washed, then rearranged. The front door locked itself at odd times, as if enforcing rules no human remembered agreeing to. And somewhere deep inside, the house remembered. I had been gone for weeks before anyone truly realized. The police came eventually, summoned by concerned neighbors. They found the house intact, no evidence of fire, no signs of forced entry, no bodies. Nothing to explain the stories whispered in the snow-laden streets. Only a faint warmth emanated from the hallway wall where the hidden room had been. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. The lead detective tapped the wall. "Hear that?" he asked. The others shook their heads. Silence. Then, as they turned to leave, a faint scratching whispered from inside the wall, almost imperceptible. The detective froze, but when he looked again, nothing was there. He shook his head, muttering about old houses, old pipes, and heating systems. And yet, he never returned. Inside, I existed differently. Or perhaps not at all. I was absorbed into the house, merged with its memory and shadow, fragmented and dispersed. I could hear everything now, the creaking of floorboards, the settling of ceilings, the faint scraping of plaster where nothing should be. I was everywhere and nowhere, watching, waiting, remembering. Time lost meaning. Days and nights blurred. Snow melted and returned. Light shifted. Shadows extended longer than they should, pressing into corners where no human could fit. Sometimes I saw glimpses of others, drawn by curiosity or misfortune. A family touring the house, a child playing near the hallway, a delivery man dropping off a package. They never knew I was there. They never saw what I had become. But I could feel them, smell them, hear their hearts beating too fast, their breaths catching as something in the house touched them lightly, a shadow brushing a shoulder, a whisper caressing an ear. They left uneasy, sometimes frightened, sometimes not remembering why. The house released them gently, letting the memory of fear linger. It had become its own master, and I, its keeper, patient, waiting. Weeks later, in the bitter heart of winter, snowstorms covered the town in isolation. People spoke less of the house, pretending it was empty. But stories persisted. Muffled knocks at night, shadows in the windows, a faint voice calling someone's name, just once, then gone. Children whispered that if you pressed your ear against the hallway wall, you could hear 3 taps, a pause, and 2 taps again, counting down in the dark. I could feel every tap, every pause, every shadow pressed against the walls. And I waited. Sometimes the wind would shift and carry voices from the room, though no one was inside. Names, promises, fragments of memory, laughter, and crying all tangled together. The house became a repository for the forgotten, the missing, the displaced. It didn't kill. It didn't consume out of cruelty. It simply held. And I held with it, patient, eternal. Christmas returned. The neighbors hung their lights again. Children built snowmen. Families gathered around warm fires. And still the house waited. On the next Christmas Eve, a family noticed a faint glow through the narrow hallway window. A child leaned close, curious. They heard a soft voice, a whisper, almost human. "Please, open it." The mother shivered. The father tried to convince the child it was the wind. The child's eyes never left the hallway. And for a moment, just long enough for the snow to drift silently against the glass, the child thought they saw a figure pressed against the wall, waving, smiling, beckoning them to come closer. A familiar figure, yet impossibly distant. The house exhaled. And I waited, patient as ever. The world moved on. People left. Lights blinked. Snow fell and melted. But the house remained. Silent most of the time except for when it wasn't. And when it called, you could hear it. If you were listening closely. 3 taps. Pause. 2 taps. A whisper, soft, intimate, impossible to ignore. You know it's time. The house was never empty. I was never gone. And Christmas would always come.